Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In the world created by Tolkien, few figures are as shrouded in mystery as the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths. Once powerful men, kings and warriors seduced by the power of the Rings of Power, they ultimately fell under the dominion of the One Ring and the will of Sauron, progressively losing their identity, their bodies, and even their names. This analysis, based on the work of Paolo Nardi, explores the origins, abilities, and symbolic significance of the Nazgûl, beings suspended between the world of the living and the shadows, whose greatest power lies not in physical strength, but in the terror they spread across Middle-earth. In his video, Paolo Nardi examines the figure of the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths that appear in the world created by Tolkien. Surprisingly little is known about these creatures. Their original identities remain almost entirely unknown. We do not know who they were when they were still men, nor what their lives were like before they fell under the power of the rings. It is quite possible that even they themselves no longer remember their own past. Among the 9 specters stands the figure of the Witch King of Angmar, the most powerful of the Nazgûl and their leader. Lord of Minas Morgul and destroyer of the Kingdom of Arnor, he became one of the greatest enemies of the Dunedain. Some sources suggest that he may have been of Númenórean origin, since among the men corrupted by the rings were also great lords of Númenórean lineage, considered among the most powerful men who ever lived, yet also among the most vulnerable to corruption. The only Nazgûl whose name is known is Khamûl, called the Shadow of the East. In the tales he is described as the second most powerful among the Ringwraiths after the Witch King, and as Sauron's lieutenant at Dol Guldur. He is also entrusted with the task of locating the Shire during the search for the One Ring, although his powers are particularly weakened by daylight. The loss of their identity is one of the most significant aspects of the Nazgûl. By falling under the dominion of the Ring and the will of Sauron, they completely surrender their free will. In this process, they lose not only their bodies and their visibility, but also their names, an element of great importance in Tolkien's narrative universe, where a name represents the very essence of an individual. The Nazgûl thus become 9 indistinguishable wraiths whose only purpose is to serve Sauron and recover the One Ring. Although they were originally given the 9 rings destined for men, they no longer wear them. Once they had become wraiths, Sauron took the rings back and kept them within the fortress of Barad-dûr. As also recounted in the Silmarillion, those who received the 9 rings were at first great kings, warriors, and mighty lords. Through the rings they gained wealth, glory, and a life that seemed almost endless. Yet this long existence slowly turned into a curse. Over time, they became invisible to mortal eyes and eventually entered the world of shadows, transforming into the dreadful servants of Sauron, the Ringwraiths. Their transformation into Nazgûl did not occur instantly. but through a slow process of fading. As Gandalf explains, anyone who possesses one of the great rings does not die, but does not truly live either. He simply continues to exist, until slowly he fades and becomes invisible forever, walking in the twilight under the dominion of the dark power that rules the rings. The rings offered to men promise power, wealth, and above all, a form of imitation of immortality. They seem to resolve humanity's fundamental problem, death. Yet this promise is deceptive. Men are, by their very nature, destined to die, as the verse from the Rings poem reminds us. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. Mortality is not a curse but a fate ordained by Eru Iluvatar, even considered by the elves as a gift. From this perspective, death and freedom are inseparable. Men possess the gift of free will, the ability to choose and to give meaning to the time granted to them. As Gandalf reminds us, what truly matters is not how long one lives, but how one chooses to use the time one has. It is precisely the awareness of death that makes human choices authentic and weighty with responsibility. For the Nazgûl, however, none of this applies. Their suspended existence eliminates the possibility of choice. They are no longer men, having surrendered their free will and become instruments of Sauron's will. Their life is not true immortality, but an empty, increasingly spectral survival. In this process, they enter a unique dimension, the so-called realm of shadows. The Nazgûl no longer fully belong to the world of the living, nor to the realm of the dead. Rather, they exist in an intermediate state, suspended between the visible and invisible worlds. In the material world, they can be perceived only when they wear clothes and cloaks that give shape to an otherwise empty presence. Some beings, however, can perceive both dimensions. Elves who have lived in the undying lands, like Glorfindel, possess a nature that allows them to exist simultaneously in the visible and invisible worlds. For this reason, they do not fear the Ringwraiths. The realm of shadows seems to reflect ancient mythological conceptions, possibly linked to Celtic, Saxon, and Norse traditions, in which the world of magic represents a parallel, mirrored reality to the ordinary one. It is normally invisible to mortals, but accessible through the rings of power. By wearing one of these rings, one becomes invisible in the normal world, but extremely visible in the invisible realm. This is exactly what happens to Frodo Baggins when he puts on the One Ring. Entering the shadow dimension, he can see the Nazgûl in their true form, still vaguely human but now spectral. Likewise, the Nazgûl can clearly perceive who carries the ring. This dynamic also explains why the Ringwraiths have difficulty locating hobbits in the Shire. In the visible world, the Nazgûl do not perceive reality as ordinary men do. They see shadows and mental outlines instead. For this reason, they rely on other senses, such as smell or the detection of living presence, and they use animals and spies to navigate. Their nature partially resembles that of vampires in folk traditions. They are neither truly alive nor completely dead, moving through an intermediate dimension while relentlessly pursuing the ring. Those who wear the One Ring can perceive this altered reality, as Samwise Gamgee experiences, describing a world in which the senses shift. Hearing becomes sharper while sight weakens, signaling entry into the invisible realm. Continuing his analysis, Paolo Nardi examines the workings of the so-called realm of shadows, the invisible dimension connected to the rings of power. When a character wears the One Ring, reality shifts dramatically. The world appears gray, indistinct, and misty, while the ring becomes a luminous and weighty presence. In this state, the wearer does not feel invisible, but, on the contrary, extremely exposed, with the constant sensation of being watched by a hostile force. Perception in this dimension changes profoundly. Sight weakens, while hearing and other senses sharpen. Yet there is also the risk of becoming trapped in the realm of shadows. This can occur, for example, if one is struck by a Morgul blade, a cursed weapon linked to the power of the Witch King of Angmar. This is precisely what happens to Frodo Baggins. The wound he receives at Weathertop threatens to drag him permanently into the spectral dimension. Only the intervention of Elrond saves him. Without it, his body would have vanished and his spirit remained trapped in the shadow world, just like the Nazgul. When Frodo confronts the Ringwraiths at the Ford of Brennan, he is able to perceive their true forms because he is now close to their dimension. At that moment, he sees the Nazgul stripped of the cloaks and hoods that normally render them visible in the material world, revealing their spectral appearance. Simultaneously, he perceives the true nature of Glorfindel, who in the invisible world appears as a luminous and powerful figure, a manifestation of his elven nature from dwelling in the Undying Lands. The narrative also shows that the Nazgul frequently wield poisoned weapons and enchanted knives, capable of drawing their victims toward the Shadow Realm. However, their primary power is not physical. As Tolkien himself explained in one of his letters, the true strength of the Ringwraiths lies in the irrational fear they inspire. Against those who feel no fear, their power is limited, yet in darkness, the terror they generate renders them immensely more menacing. This ability to induce fear is evident throughout the narrative. The arrival of a Nazgul causes panic not only among men but also among animals, and their cry can extinguish hope in the hearts of those who hear it. Ordinary horses cannot withstand their presence, while those used by the Wraiths have been bred or trained to serve Sauron. In some cases, Mordor's agents even steal horses for their purposes. In many ways, the Nazgul resemble figures from horror lore, such as vampires or ghosts. Tolkien himself acknowledged this component in his works, asserting that any story that aims to portray reality seriously must also contain elements of fear and darkness. The terror surrounding the Ringwraiths, in fact, extends beyond them, encompassing all that comes from Mordor and the dark power spreading across Middle-earth. Among their most fearsome abilities is the so-called Black Breath, a curse that throws victims into a state of delirium and despair that can lead to death. Characters such as Faramir, Elwyn, and Meriadoc Brandybuck suffer its effects during the War of the Ring. Only a few individuals, including Aragorn and Elrond, possess the power to heal those afflicted, demonstrating once again that the danger posed by the Ringwraiths is rooted not only in physical strength, but primarily in the dominion of fear and shadow. The history of the Nazgul illustrates one of the deepest themes in Tolkien's work: the corruption of power and the cost of pursuing immortality. Those who were once men ultimately become will-less shadows, bound forever to the fate of the One Ring and to the dominion of Sauron. See you in the next episode of Literary Cafe, here on Compelling Topics.